Welcome to the Craft and Character Podcast. Today, we're going to discuss what the craft of communication has been like for the Dr. Glenn Packiam. He's the Associate Senior Pastor at New Life Church in Colorado Springs, and actually is the lead pastor at the New Life downtown location. He's been a worship leader. He was a part of Desperation Band back in the day. He, in my opinion, is a profoundly deep and thoughtful scholar. He's got his doctorate in theology from Durham University in the UK. The guy's got a ton of degrees, but deep down, he is just a gift to the kingdom. He's also an author. He wrote this beautiful book called Blessed, Broken, Given. And the talk that we're actually going to discuss is part one of a 3-week series that he did a number of months ago at New Life, and it's called Blessed. And what I want you to do is I want you to hear this kind of 2-minute clip to kind of start our conversation again, because I want you to understand that we're not just talking about communicators. I want you to hear their sound. I want you to get a taste of something that stood out to me when I listened to Dr. Packiam share, and then we'll just dive into this conversation on craft and character. So hear this.
And it goes on, verse 26, and God said, "Let us make mankind human ones in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." And God created mankind, humanity, in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them. The reason we have to go back to the start is this is the first time we are introduced to this word blessed. The Old Testament was written in Hebrew. The New Testament is written in Greek. But by the time of Jesus, they had translated the Old Testament into Greek. And so many of the followers of Jesus would have learned the Old Testament in Greek. And so when you find a word in the New Testament in Greek, you kind of want to know, well, did they use that word in the Old Testament for something else? When the gospel writers say that Jesus blessed bread, it's the same word that they translated Genesis 1 with and said, God blessed humanity and God blessed creation. That word is the root, shares the common root here, the word eulogeo, from which we get our word eulogy. Now, very often, we save eulogies for when a person's time on earth is done. What if eulogies are actually for the living? What if eulogies are for the time that we actually have where we're able to say, I bless you? God says a eulogy, if you will, at the very beginning of creation. The very beginning of the world, God says, I'm going to bless you. You say, well, what does that word mean? I mean, what does this Greek word mean? It's very simple. It simply means at the heart of it, to speak well of. To speak well of, to praise. To be blessed is to let God retell your story.
Well, Dr. Glenn Packiam, thanks so much for joining us on the Craft and Character Podcast. And I really wanted people to hear that part of your teaching, because you do a great job. You do a great job of taking complex theological ideas and making them so accessible. And that's really what I want to really spend our time discussing, that and the power of finding your voice. But I thought just for a moment, I know that this message is not just a teach, but it's kind of a life's work per se. Can you just talk a little bit about that kind of idea of blessed, broken, given? I know it's a book. It's an amazing book. I'm going to encourage everyone to read it, but just maybe just spend a moment, just talk about that, and then we can dive into accessibility and finding your voice.
About 12 or 15 years ago, we began kind of introducing some historic worship practices into the life of our church. And it was mostly because our church needed an anchor, but also because we as individuals, as leaders, needed an anchor. We found that we were giving people just good songs and good sermons, but there needed to be more than that. And so coming to the Lord's table each week became this almost like this tether, this rope to the beginning, to the early church, to their practices, and it grounded us. It helped people know that the New Life story was bigger than the name of one pastor or person and all of that. And so as we began to do that each week, the image of Jesus taking bread, blessing it, breaking it, giving it, just became so powerful for us. So in the congregation that I lead, New Life Downtown, we would use those three words to talk about our life together as the people of God. And we said, look, man, when we come to worship on Sundays, that's like remembering our blessedness in Christ. That's kind of reorienting the ground of our being in the gospel and the good news. And then when we open our hearts to one another in small groups and meal groups, that's like being broken and being opened up together and shared vulnerability. And then when we're given, that's our purpose. That's why we're not just in the city for our own sake. This is not about padding our stats and adding to our numbers. This is about being in the city for the sake of the city. And the bread is just as the bread is given for the life of the world. So as we began to do that practice and preach that paradigm, it began to just get in our bones, So for me, it is very much a life message, because we're always looking for ways to bridge what happens on Sunday with the rest of our life in the rest of the week. And these words and this imagery was a powerful way to do that. But I think in other ways, it's a life message, because I've always felt like, man, there are just moments that seem so ordinary, and seem so mundane. And I grew up in kind of that era of everybody's going to be a world changer and a history maker. And I love that. And that is inspiring when you're a young person. But it can set you up for profound disappointments when you get into normal life and you're like, wait, am I doing anything? So maybe it's my Enneagram 3 wrestling for significance and achievement or all that. But it's always spoken to me in a very deep way that Jesus took bread, common, ordinary bread. And so those are two of the reasons why this is a deep message for me.
Yeah, I love when you were even in the teach was talking about the bread of heaven, and you're like, Jesus, I think you could have given yourself maybe a different title than the ordinary one of heaven. It just kind of, and I never thought of that. I've always thought of Jesus using something that was so ordinary here, but the way that he describes it in these cosmic terms. But yeah, I think there was just such power in that. And again, this is where, you've got this doctorate. I mean, you've studied at Durham. You're a fellow, like you're a teacher. I'm incredibly over the years been blessed because I respect your scholar work, your theologian perspective, but I also love that you fight to make it accessible for the explorer, for the person who's, and we both love alpha. We both love, kind of that evangelistic heart, but you have this unique tether to kind of the ancient practices, to deep theological research, and a heart for people who are being formed and shaped to greater discipleship and people who are far from God. You don't typically find someone with that kind of bandwidth, which leads me to, in this whole Craft and Character podcast about working on the craft of communication, how do you fight to hold something to be deep and theological, yet profoundly accessible? How do you do that from week to week?
Fight is a great word, Steve, because it is that for me. It doesn't come naturally, and it was a lot of years in the making. I mean, I've been preaching weekly since 2009, and I look back at some of those early sermon notes and I think, oh my goodness, what was I doing? And, prior to that, I probably spoke a half dozen times a year in various settings, college 20-somethings ministry, maybe an evening service here or there. But 2009 started preaching weekly, and I was trying to cram everything I had just learned in one sermon,
Yes.
I mean, my outlines were like, this could have been an entire series, but I tried to pack it all in one sermon. So it doesn't come easy for me. I do want to say too much, and it still is the ongoing challenge. But I've been helped along the way by listening to great communicators. early on, even when I was only preaching a handful of times a year, I read Andy Stanley's book, Communicating for a Change. And I love the way he talked about the tension and setting that up. And then I read Chip and Dan Heath's book, Made to Stick, and just that whole idea of where's the gap in people's knowledge and help them bring them up to the edge of their gap in what they know and what they can't explain. And then, introduce the message. And then I've loved Tim Keller, his book on preaching, where he talks about what's the cultural question or the longing. So for me, very often the beginning of the sermon is so important to me because I'm trying to find out the thing that really grabs people, the thing that they're wrestling with. Maybe it's a question, maybe it's a tension, maybe it's an objection that they have to the faith, And I do think, growing up, I grew up in Malaysia. It's a multi-religious, country. Christians are only about 10 or 11%. And so I grew up kind of in this pluralistic setting. And on top of that, I am wired as this intellectual kind of guy. So here I am in charismatic churches in Malaysia, but always questioning and second guessing. And I felt like I had a lot of preachers that dismissed that said, oh, don't overanalyze, don't overthink. And so in some ways, I'm trying to preach to the 15-year-old version of myself, to the person who's like, I want to know this, but these things don't add up or these things don't make sense. So I am trying to have that voice in my head of like, what would a person really say if they came to this text afresh and were like, that's stupid or that's crazy talk, but it's a constant fight.
Well, you did that, and that's why I wanted to share that clip at the beginning of the podcast, because even as you took, and you do this so naturally, you go back to the creation story. You always try to frame it, with the right perspective, the right lens. But then you take this word that's so common to us in the States, this idea of eulogy, and now you've now seen this word bless with whoa. It's like God has given you a eulogy before you ever died, and it was just this like fascination with words. But again, you took an idea, made it so relatable to think like, wow, it's not like God is blessing the end of our life. He's blessing the beginning.
Yeah.
It's just
I wish I would have said it quite like that. Steve. That's really nice. That's good.
No, but this is what you do on a regular basis, and I do think the art of elimination is one of the hardest things for the Kellers to the emerging voices, just cutting and slicing and going, and you've got a new thing that you are in process of releasing, like 8 talks on Romans 8, which makes me think like, okay, you've learned something, because now you're not doing 1 talk on Romans 8, you're doing 8. But how talk about that, because I think that's a part of that elimination process that you're seeing. Can you share a little bit about that and where people can find that?
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm just starting a little email list thing, and I'm going to tweet a link to it later, where people can sign up for it. And I'm going to send them. It's a one page of my notes. And it's basically 3 or 4 verses at a time, working through Romans 8 in 8 sessions. And each talk ended up being about 7 or 8 minutes, and there's 8 of them. And so, but yeah, it is a bit of learning over the years. But I think what's difficult. So at New Life, we preach mostly from a text, and I get preaching from topics, and that's great too. But the trick when you preach from a text is the text is not written in a way that naturally divides itself up in a series. So in my brain, you study into the text, and there's 3 or 4 things you could chase. And sometimes, depending on the writer, Paul is maybe a little more linear than John, but you get kind of this thing where actually they'll say something here, and then they'll work down 5 or 6 verses and then come back to that idea. And so you have a lot of decisions to make of like, all right, how do I simplify this without doing violence to the text? How do I bring the core idea that addresses the sort of cultural question or the longing in people's hearts without muting or muffling the text? And that is part of the wrestle for me in preaching from a text.
Yeah, do you have a few questions that you just ask yourself, like for any person who's teaching on a regular basis, when they're approaching, a theological treatise that Romans 8 is, and you're like, you're kind of going, okay, make sure you answer these questions so that so that you don't lose the heartbeat of what Paul or John is writing for the sake. And often what I'll talk about is like everyone comes into a message, whether they know it or not, with an ache, with a desire, and feeling a cultural stronghold. And how does this like speak to it? But sometimes a teacher will go all felt need with not bringing out the desire, or how this actually benefits or works towards a cultural stronghold. And you do those three really well in a message. If there's questions that you ask yourself.
I like the way you said that. That's really good, Steve. Some of the questions I ask is, what is the longing we can't name?
Oh, that's good.
So in Romans, it opens up, there is no condemnation. Well, maybe the longing that we can't quite name is, I want to be free from that voice in my head that says I'm not enough or that I failed. There's a condemnation, not from some devil, but actually from ourselves or from our own guilt. So the longing we can't name, or the fear we can't face. Sometimes there's a fear we can't face, and that fear could be that God doesn't accept you, or that God secretly has reservations about you. And so I might name that, or the question we can't shake, and maybe the question we can't shake is, later on in Romans 8, where in all things God is working, for good. Maybe one of the questions there is, where is God? And is God even at work in the midst of this mess? Because it says all things, but we all know there's moments where it doesn't feel like he's there, So I like to foreground that. I like to put that right at the beginning to say, this is the question we can't shake, or the longing we can't name, or the fear we can't face. And then to begin to look at the text and find ourselves in it, and then at the end of it, really point to Jesus. So one of the techniques for me is the end of the sermon has to point to kind of the originating love of the Father, or the originating work of the Father, if you will, that this was always in God's heart. And that's why, you said, I like to go back to Genesis. I do, because we start so often with all have sinned instead of in the beginning, God, and he blessed. So the originating sort of work of the Father, the finished work of the Son, and the ongoing work of the Spirit. Sometimes in some paradigms of preaching, people will say, well, let's just point to Jesus. And I get that. And that's really good. However, it can leave a person saying, okay, it's great. So Jesus has done it all. Nothing for me, right? I'm good.
Right.
Instead of saying, because Jesus has done it all, and because the Father always intended for you to join in, the Spirit now is the power for you to go and do likewise. The Spirit is now for you on you to carry on this. So Father, Son, and Holy Spirit they're in my mind as I'm crafting the end of the sermon.
Yeah, that's so good. And for many of you who are like in your car, or in your office, or at your home still in shelter in place listening to this, I wish you could see Glenn's like body gestures as he's talking about the heart of the Father and Genesis 1. His hands are like all over the place, because that's a beautiful picture, because when you start getting to Genesis and you start getting to Jesus, and you even start talking about the Spirit's power and that the whole larger story and finding ourselves in it, I saw it in the Teach, and I've seen it in the Teach on regular times from you. It's just it just comes out of you, which I absolutely love. Many people probably know this, maybe they don't. You're a writer. You've written a number of books. You're this associate senior pastor at New Life. So you're teaching on a regular basis, lead the downtown campus, but you are also a worship leader. And the other thing I think when we talk about the craft of communication is each of those are three different mediums, from songwriting to writing a chapter in a book to getting on stage and writing a message and delivering a message.
Yeah.
One of the big things that I've been fascinated is watching you over the years. I'd say I got introduced to your music first, but then introduced to you as a speaker somewhere around 2013, 14,
Sure.
And began listening on a quite regular basis. But watching you discover your voice and bring all those worlds together. How can you talk about that process? Because it is an interesting thing for a worship leader by craft to like kind of move into this like role as a scholar, teacher, author. I don't know. Just if you don't mind talking about that fight to find your voice.
Finding your voice is such an important thing, regardless of what the craft is. I mean, I would say finding my voice was a struggle as a songwriter, and as a worship leader and as a preacher. So it is an ongoing journey, and it really, the right community around you is so, so important, because we kind of have this illusion that, these geniuses just emerge on the stage one day and they, but it's not true. We all have been formed in a crucible, and we all have been shaped by a community. So I'm very grateful for friends who gave feedback and input, and guys who stretched me. The team here at New Life, we're all very different from one another. We did a few months ago. We did a little sort of preachers workshop for some upcoming developing communicators at New Life. And the 3 or 4 of us that were presenting were like very different, and we acknowledge that. And I think so part of finding your own voice is being comfortable in who you are and who you're not, while not using that as an excuse to not get better at certain things, So one of the things that I've had to learn is to actually bring in some of that paradigm of songwriting and to think of a sermon having a chorus. Where is the chorus in the sermon? Where is that? This is the motif that they're going to remember. They're going to go out singing that, and I would load it with so much content that there was no chorus. It was like 8 verses long, 8 stanzas. And so I had to pray and be like, okay, a big part of the sermon prep needed to be stepping away from the computer, going for a walk or a drive or whatever, and saying, Lord, what is the burning heart of this message? Like, what is your burden for your people? Like, if you could tell them one thing from all these 3 or 4 pages of notes, what is it you want them to know? And then I would kind of trim from there and eliminate from there. And if anything was cluttering the chorus, I would eliminate it, So that's kind of the crossover.
That's a great line. If anything is cluttering the chorus, I will eliminate it. I mean, and it's amazing, because when I listen to your talk on be blessed, the thought that I had and I was trying to listen to it on multiple levels. Like, one, I listened to it just as a someone who wants to be fed, and I loved it. Then I listened to it again as someone who was like, hey, I'm preparing for a podcast, listen to it. But then I listened to it again, trying to think through, if this was a song, what would and you can obviously feel the chorus of the blessed, broken, given. It's the arc of the series and the song. But I started thinking, like, what's this bridge? And I hope everyone listens to this. There will be a link in the show notes where you can go listen to this talk, and you can subscribe to Glenn's YouTube channel, which is amazing. But the piece that I love too, that I felt like was the bridge, is, you might remember this, is you went in and you talked about John being carried in to like these house churches. And the thing that he would just say is, beloved, 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 and it was just this like, it felt connected to the talk, but it just felt this powerful. And it, with the story of your dad, and it just kind of led into this whole piece. And I just was like, that is like a bridge. That is a moment that I've not seen demonstrated with body language on a stage and just with the voice. And I just go, I can't imagine what that must have been like to be one of those people in that house church, to hear someone like John just saying, this is who you are. I love it.
Yes.
And so I think that you have found something that like resounding sound that mixes the choruses, the scholar, just the pastor, and that evangelist heart that has blessed me. And I can see that you have just, again, 1 Timothy 4, it says, do not neglect your gift. This is Paul telling his mentee, and he's like, be diligent in these matters.
Yes.
So that give yourself wholly to them, so that everyone may see your progress. And like, just to watch your dedication, man, it spurs me on. I love it. And it's a gift to the kingdom. So thank you for that.
Man, Steve, that means so much to me. And I wanted to give your listeners a little snapshot. When we started New Life Downtown in 2012, so I'd been preaching weekly for about 3 years, but then now in a different way. I formed a little group of congregants, and we would meet at a Starbucks Wednesday or Thursday afternoon, and when the sermon was written, and I would talk through it with them. Yes. And it helped me so much, because then I began to realize, oh, this made sense in my study, but it doesn't make sense with the people, And so even that to me is like in the songwriting stage, where you take the song out of the greenhouse and you test it for the first time in the congregational setting, and then you're like, oh, that was weird. That pre-chorus was, too meandering or whatever. And that's so important, because I think we can fall in love with our sermon as an outline, but if you don't just test it in a little safe place, and I know some people do this, they preach with their staff before the weekend, and that's great too. For me, just having a small table, talking through it, it gives it some warmth, and that's for me. That's the part of the sermon writing that I needed to work on, is where's the warmth? Where are the people? Where does this hit the heart? I can never get away from having points in the sermon. I'm going to have points, but where's the warmth in the heart? Where's the emotion that moves people?
Yeah. Well, I think that's really, 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 really good, because, so you look at stand-up comedians, they're walking in late at night and they're just working on 3 or 4 jokes, and they're like, that bombed, but they're trying to build for an hour special. Yes. And I think the more that we can have people that aren't like us, as threes on the Enneagram, we're not finding more threes, but to find people who are in different kind of spaces and spheres of life that we can talk through. And isn't it amazing is when you have that and you're like, oh my goodness, like Connie loved that idea. That spoke to her, and she added a couple thoughts that I think would really resonate to her friends that I would have never thought of. And then you go and deliver the message, and you're like, God through Connie made that so much stronger. Exactly. And you just start thinking, when you see that playing out, you go, why haven't I done this earlier? And I just think that is, I'm glad you said that, because they're a really, really important piece. Look, I want to shift, because part of the, obviously the podcast is on craft and character, and the ampersand is so important to me. I think for many people, they focus so much on their craft, and we see it with The Last Dance, with Michael Jordan. I love, just so gifted. Or sometimes we see in spiritual formation centers, people focusing so much on their character and transformation, but not so much on their craft. Because but I think what I've appreciated about you and many others voices that I just respect, women and men in the kingdom, is you're doing both. And what would you say are some of those exercises or practices or reasons for why, at the end of the day, you are committing so much to having your character lead the way?
Well, at the end of the day, a sermon is not just a talk. It's not a TED talk. It comes from a deep life with God, and it comes from, I think Brueggemann said it's a word from another world. But if we are not living from that other world, then it doesn't. It hasn't taken root in us. And it should go without saying, but the pressure on us as pastors to produce a talk every week can tempt us to just sort of put together a good outline that we're proud of, and clever stories and all the right things. And again, there are parallels with me from my years leading worship. It's easy to stand up and just get through the sets, and in the set list, and how to shape the contour of it. So this is the high point, this is the low point. But we used to talk about a worship leader having their own private times of worship with the Lord. This is David on the back hills, right, with his harp before he's leading. The worship leaders need that, and preachers need that. I need time with the Bible that's not for the purpose of sermon prep. I need time to just read the Word of God deeply. That doesn't have me firing for 3 points and an outline, and so there is kind of the intimacy with Jesus aspect of it that shapes the character. But there's also, and this is like artists. Art emerges when you're okay with waste. And what I mean by that is you're going to write a lot of bad songs. You're going to sit down at the piano and pick up the guitar, and maybe 9 times out of 10, nothing comes of it. But you have to be willing. There has to be enough white space so that there's almost sort of this excess before something beautiful emerges. And in a similar way, I have to read stuff that will never show up in a sermon. But I have to read for my own sake, for the purpose of enriching the soil of my own heart. So oftentimes I'm reading biblical studies stuff and theology stuff that will never, well, some of it will, but most of it will never show up in a sermon outline. It's not a commentary of the text. It's just something I'm chasing out of interest, and that childlike wonder of fascination with God's word and with you gotta cultivate that, and you gotta chase those things that you don't realize it, but you're laying the groundwork. You're enriching the soil for the seeds that will be planted in it. Or to switch metaphors, it's like digging a well before you need the water.
Yes.
You need to cultivate that deep place of intimacy and of learning and pursuing wonder before you end up needing content.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because a mentor of mine used to always say, don't go to counseling when things have fallen apart. Go to counseling before things have fallen apart, right? I think so often we go to the well because we need something. We need to teach. We need it. But you're talking about the kind of the intentionality of digging way before you even need an idea because you need it for yourself.
Yes.
And that cultivation of that childlike wonder.
Yes.
Is that something you schedule? Is that something that what does that look like in just real practical kind of terms? Because I love that idea.
It has to be in the mornings for me because my brain is pretty fried at night. So I used to be pretty bad about my schedule. I just say yes to appointments whenever it was, But Brady has really modeled a good example for us here of like just blocking out chunks and then I've adopted kind of block scheduling like so many people do. So for me, Mondays are a day where it's not a day off. It is the work day. Fridays and Saturdays are my days off, but Mondays are the days where I don't schedule any reoccurring appointments. So once in a while, if there's a crisis situation or whatever, I can fit it in on a Monday, or a catch up with a friend over lunch is fine. But that just not having the press of my schedule, I can't create when I feel the walls closing in. So Mondays are it's a wide open space for me. So personal devotional life oftentimes is psalm praying and then reading a chapter out of the Bible. And then often I'll go for a walk, listen to an app like Lectio 365, our friend Pete Gregg's app, just something devotionally, and then about an hour of just reading something else. So that's the goal. Okay, that's the goal. It doesn't always happen that way, and oftentimes there are weeks where things get pressed and it goes up. But if I can spend about 45 minutes to an hour, 4 or 5 days a week of reading something that's not sermon related, that's just me chasing a fascination with the scriptures, or that's good. So, and I'll say, related to that, sometimes you want to teach at, let's just put numbers on this, you want to teach at a level 8. So what I would say is you need to actually then read or absorb at a level 10. And the reason for that is output is always lower in quality than input. It's just one of those things. Maybe it's the fallen world thing. You think of a photocopy machine. The copy is always worse than the original, right? So if you want to, let's just use an example. If you want to teach like Tim Keller, you can't just listen to Tim Keller. You got to listen and read who Tim Keller is listening to and reading, right?
Yeah.
So chase the sources, and you'll be absorbing in greater complexity, but you're going to communicate in greater simplicity.
That's so good. I love that. Even just the visual, the 10 and the 8. Glenn, one of the other things, and we've got mutual friends, and we've been together a couple of times. One time I was out at New Life, and one of the things I feel like I've always respected the way that other people talk about you and have experienced in just a handful of times that we've been in the same place, but it's been your ability to be present. I feel like there's always just this sense of peace and calm. Like I've not ever heard someone say,
I don't know, Steve.
That Glenn Packiam, he's a stressed but there's just this sense of ease. And again, I know that life's not easy, and especially you're walking through some, but that doesn't just come, and that doesn't just happen, and we read in Philippians that, to be rejoice always. That's a command, you know what I mean? To like live in that kind of life. But I feel like there is just this sweet spirit. When my friends talk about their interactions with you, they're just like, they're not like, man, that guy's wasn't present. That guy was a jerk. They're just this peaceful spirit. How do you have that? You know what I mean? And again, this is awkward, but I really want people to see like, these aren't just, this is not a different person that's on stage. Because I think you and I both hold this. All of life is a stage. All of life is, and again, it's that cultivation of going, it's easy to flip a switch and be on when there's 2,000 people in the room and be completely different or forget who we're called to be. And again, perfection is impossible. Perfection is not the goal, but just that constant work for that transformed life, that deeply formed life, as our friend Rich would call it. What you gave us a little bit of like the cultivation of ideas. What does that look like for spirit and character?
Well, first of all, you're being very kind, Steve, and I think my family would give a different picture of me at moments of stress and frustration. And my wife is a really good. She was trained as a counselor, and she's very good at helping me know when I need to stop and slow down and journal. We were joking about this. I am a 3, and the one of the traps of a 3 is just to keep moving, and to not stop. But I spent a lot of my teenage and 20-something years with daily journaling. I don't do that anymore. But I've had to be able to stop and to name, Lord, what's behind this anger? What am I sad about? And I began seeing a spiritual director about once a month. Well, it started once a month in 2013, and then it went to once a quarter, and then now it's a couple times a year. The goal is, it's almost like a forced checkpoint, a forced stop, take stock of your soul, and for me, I mean, it is really, in addition to all of that, it's also just sort of an awareness, a practicing of God's presence throughout the day, So just stopping and saying, thank you, Lord, help me, Jesus, come, Holy Spirit, and awareness to Him. Because when you develop that kind of prayer life and the repeated turning toward Jesus, turning toward the Spirit, that's where your heart can stay soft. It's interesting. It's very similar to, the Gottmans. They talk about this with marriage. They talk about the turn toward, and spouses who stop turning toward one another get a hardness in their heart. It was a similar way in our relationship with the Lord. If we only turn toward Him in these moments of intensity, but it doesn't work. It has to be communion. It has to be throughout the day. So yes, practices like beginning my day with prayer and ending the day. Yes, but it's throughout the day. After this, I'm going to get in my car and head up to a very big meeting with some decisions ahead for when the church regathers and all that. I'm going to be praying all the way through. I'm going to be taking a breath, saying, Lord, help us, be with us, beware, opening meetings that way, filling up those spaces. One of the things my spiritual director challenged me is, he said, Glenn, as often as you refresh the apps on your phone, would you refresh your soul with prayer, Wow. And I thought, man, that's what I want. I want that tenderness to be refreshed throughout the day.
Yeah, that's so good. I think about that idea of just the return. So easy. I know God's presence is everywhere, but I just, like Moses in the desert, might not be aware of that burning bush, and the rabbis have wondered with Midrash that bush had been burning for years, and Moses was unable to see it. Just his headspace and heart space was distracted. And I can go, me too. And that teshuvah, that like return, that like daily momentary repentance of like, I'm welcomed back into the presence. I love that consciousness of it for you. And I mean, and when we talk about character, and New Life has gone through a unique kind of season many years ago, where you saw this, and on the backside, and like, what has that kind of done within you to really showcase the importance of this? Anything you would say about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's late 2006, founding senior pastor, very public moral failure. And then new senior pastor came in August of 2007, and 100 days into his time, a gunman came on our campus, opened fire, 2 teenage girls lost their lives. Very, very tragic. And through both of those incidents, scandal and shooting, our church has been a praying church and a worshiping church. And if not for that belief that the Holy Spirit is here, speaking, present, comforting, if not for that, I don't know how we would have made it through. Because when you go through crisis, initially anyway, you don't need a lot of exposition of the why, because there isn't any.
Right.
But what you need is presence. And we say that with one another, we need to be present to one another. That's true. And we need to be aware of God's presence with us. And so just that belief in a dynamic, personal, dialogical relationship with God through the Holy Spirit, and accessing that for us. I know there's many ways of accessing that, and we love practices from the contemplative tradition and the charismatic tradition, all of that. But worship and prayer has been a huge well for us. But to go back to that well metaphor, you dig wells before you need the water. I would also say you need a few different wells. I went through a time where I was so immersed in like music and modern worship that well was dry for me, And so that's when I began, what about psalm praying? And what's this thing, the Lectio Divina? And what's this thing, the prayer of examen? And there were other contemplative traditions that became like new wells for me. And so I think as leaders, because we're overly exposed to all of these wells that we're giving other people to drink all the time, sometimes we need to drink from a different well than the one that we're offering people water from.
Wow.
So I'm in this, charismatic sort of megachurch context. Music is great. It's amazing. But when I need to be renewed, I might listen to choir music. I might listen to like quiet chants of the Psalms or something. And so that might be true for leaders out there. Have a multiple sources of renewal.
That's so good, and I love that you talk about the power of presence. I think that's one of the reasons like God gave his son 2 names, and typically we love just to bring one of those names, into a conversation, but the sense of, like Emmanuel, God with us, and, Yeshua, God's mighty to save, like both of those are so important. And yet it's sometimes people aren't asking like for the exposition. They're longing for that Emmanuel, that he's near and that he's present. And I think the more wells that we have that are feeding into us, the more present we can be to God, but also more present to those that are in need. And Glenn, that's, again, I don't know the kind of wells that you are digging. I can see the fruit of what God is cultivating in you. And just as a one pastor from afar, thank you. And you're someone I appreciate, I respect, and I'm really hoping that like more people would be able to just listen and discover your work. If people weren't familiar with you, where would be the best place for them to find maybe the Roman stuff, or just more info on who Dr. Glenn Packiam is?
Well, probably my website. It's glennpackiam.com, and that's Glenn with 2 N's. And Packiam is like the 3 words, pack, P-A-C-K-I, and then am, glennpackiam.com. And there's a link there to sign up for the email list for the Roman stuff. But there's links to books and videos and all that other fun stuff. So yeah.
That's awesome. And I would tell you, if you're listening, Glenn sent me some of his notes, even just the way that he puts notes together. It's worthy to sign up for the list just to see how he arranges ideas. Again, as a communicator, as a teacher, pastor, like I love seeing how people fight for ideas and make them accessible. And Glenn, you are a master at that. Hey man, thank you so much for this time. Grateful for you. And hey, many blessings to you as you help lead kind of this season of regathering in Colorado.
Thank you, Steve. Bless you too. Grateful for you.
Well, thanks so much for tuning into the Craft and Character podcast. Here's the deal. We're here to help you. And I want to help you get better at your spiritual gift of teaching and preaching. But I also want to help introduce you to people, introduce you to opportunities that can help your character lead the way. And so if you go to our website, www.craftandcharacter.org, you'll learn more about opportunities, gatherings, conversations, blog posts, you name it, we're there. We want to help you. We're on Instagram at Craft and Character and on Twitter at Craft_Character. But I hope today you were blessed by the words of Dr. Glenn Packiam. That's just so fun to say. But I'd encourage you, please check out his website, glennpackiam.com. He's an amazing, accomplished songwriter. I love his book, Blessed, Broken, Given. If you need a good read, please pick that book up. And if you just want to learn more, that page will introduce you to his YouTube channel where you can learn more about his teachings and just watch how he takes complex ideas and makes them so accessible so that people who are far from God, people who are growing in their Christ-centeredness, are being shaped and formed. Glenn is a gift, and I hope you were truly blessed by what he said. If you have enjoyed this podcast, this is the number 2 for us. Please share it, rate it, review it, pass it on. We just want to be helping you continue to not neglect your spiritual gift, to help you be diligent, and to help you grow in what God has entrusted for you. And I hope in this week that you would have the courage to go dig some new wells, that you would find yourselves kind of drinking in some new streams. Maybe it's around creativity. Maybe it's an ancient practice. Maybe it's a fruit of the Spirit. Whatever it is that the Spirit is leading you into, may you have the courage to take some time in your schedule this week and say, I got to dig new wells. Maybe it's making a call to a counselor or spiritual director, but whatever it is, may you have that courage to dig new wells, because in a few months, you're going to need that. You're going to need that. And because you had the foresight and the perspective to do that, you're actually going to have something to give away that's not just going to bless you and bless your family, but it's also going to bless the community that God has entrusted you to lead and to love and to model what it means to follow Christ for. I hope you have a blessed week. Let's go dig some new wells. Until next time, grace and peace.